Hi, I'm Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors. And this week's contract tip has to do with, ta-da, the new 2016 GAR contract forms. They are out, well, I take that back. They are out for trainers. They will be out in January, and so I'm going to start to introduce everyone to them starting today. The next few videos throughout the end of the year will be on the new 2016 GAR contracts and the changes that are going on in them, the new forms as well as the changes. And starting in January, we are going to have a slew of classes on the 2016 GAR throughout all of our branches in Maximum One. We will begin working on the January calendar shortly, so stay tuned and please check our calendar. I will link the link below. But a lot of the changes, there are not a lot of changes this year to GAR. The changes that they did make, however, a lot of them are in response to, drum roll please, TRID and CFPB changes. Imagine that. So one of the biggest changes that they did is they they revamped the financing contingency forms. So let me go over with you the conventional loan exhibit in the GAR contract. It is form F64. I will link a training copy below for you to see. These are not available for use yet. This is just for you to see, to get an idea of what the changes are coming in 2016. So the first big change is in the first paragraph where it talks about the loan application. Now, previously, you're used to the fact that you have to fill in X number of days for the buyer to apply for the loan. Well, as you know from all the TRID training, a loan application now consists of very specific pieces of information that a lender must have. So now in the GAR contract, it states under paragraph 1, application, buyers shall promptly apply for and in good faith seek to obtain the conventional loan or loans described such that the buyer can fulfill the buyer's obligations hereunder prior to the expiration of the conventional loan financing contingency. So they took out the number of days for the buyer to actually make a loan application. Then the next section, you just fill out the loan terms. That has not changed. Paragraph 2, they changed the title of it and changed it just a little bit. So let me read that to you. Use of a particular mortgage lender. Unless an approved mortgage lender is identified below, buyer may apply for approval of the loan with any institutional mortgage lender licensed to do business in Georgia. If an approved mortgage lender is identified below, buyer shall apply for the approval of the loan with at least one of such approved mortgage lender. Nothing herein shall require the buyer to obtain mortgage financing from the approved mortgage lender. And then you fill in the name or names of the lenders with whom the buyer is going to go fill out a loan application. Then number 3, this paragraph is in there. The buyer may apply for different loans other than the one that you've described in the loan description, the terms of which, however, the denial letter of such other loan other than what you have described in the loan exhibit does not, shall not be the basis for terminating a contract based on this contingency. That has not changed. All right, number 4, this is a change in direct response to the TRID guidelines and laws. Buyer to notify the seller of the intent to proceed. When it is known, the buyer shall promptly notify the seller of any mortgage lender to whom the buyer has sent notice of intent to proceed with the loan application, and at that point, the name and contact information of the loan originator. So just a brief TRID synopsis. A buyer applies for a loan with a mortgage lender. There's certain pieces of information that constitute a loan application. After the lender gets those pieces of information, the lender sends out to the buyer a loan estimate. The buyer then has so many days, I believe it's 10 days, to quote unquote shop for another lender. At that point, the buyer must send back to the lender a notice of intent to proceed with that lender so that the lender can then proceed with their TRID guidelines to actually start with the mortgage on that, for the loan for the mortgage on that person. There's a lot more to TRID. Please take a TRID class. But the intent to proceed, that is one of the parameters of the TRIG guidelines. So now GAR in the loan exhibit has incorporated that for the financing contingency. Then here is the biggest change. Under the financing contingency, you still fill in the number of days. So buyer has X number of days from binding agreement date to determine if the buyer has the ability to obtain the loan as described in the paragraph above. The buyer shall be deemed to have the ability to obtain the loan unless prior to the end of the financing contingency period, the buyer A, notifies the seller that the buyer is terminating the agreement because the buyer has been turned down for the loan. And then, here's the change. B, provides the seller within 7 days from the date of such notice the letter of loan denial from a mortgage lender based on the mortgage lender's customary and standard underwriting criteria. So if a buyer is going to terminate under the financing contingency, they still have to do so within the specified number of days that the buyer and seller agreed to on the form. However, and they still have to provide a loan denial letter. So those two parameters have not changed. What has changed is the buyer now has 7 days from the date of giving notice of termination based on this contingency. They have 7 days to actually provide the seller with the loan denial letter. And it further goes on to state that the loan denial letter and mortgage lender issuing the loan denial letter meet all the criteria set forth elsewhere in the exhibit, notwithstanding any provision to the contrary contained herein. The loan denial letter may be provided to the seller after the financing contingency period has ended if the above referenced 7 days falls outside of that. So, synopsis. Buyer has X number of days from binding agreement date that you fill in the blank and you agree to terminate based on the financing contingency. They must provide a loan denial letter. However, that loan denial letter, the buyer has 7 days from sending their notice of termination to provide the seller with the loan denial letter. And if those 7 days falls outside of the number of days for the financing contingency, that is perfectly acceptable. Huge change in the contract. Next paragraph, they've just made it a little more explicit. Use of approved mortgage lender and the loan denial letter. If the buyer has agreed to apply for the loan with an approved mortgage lender, as we discussed in one of the previous paragraphs, the loan denial letter must be from the approved mortgage lender. If the buyer is not required to apply for the loan with an approved mortgage lender, the loan denial letter may be from any institutional mortgage lender licensed to do business in Georgia. A loan denial letter from a non-institutional mortgage lender shall not be the basis for the buyer to terminate this agreement. And then it continues on. Everything else in the conventional loan exhibit has not changed. It goes on to state what the loan denial letter cannot be based on. For example, buyer lacking sufficient funds other than the loan to close the loan, i.e. down payment, so closing costs, so forth and so on. Buyer has not leased or sold, etc. Those things have not changed from the previous loan exhibits. Anyway, just a brief glimpse again in the 2016 GAR Contract Dissection CE classes that we already have approved and we will begin teaching in January. We will go over all of these forms in depth, but just wanted to give you the heads up and first glimpse at the new GAR contracts. Thank you so much for watching. Again, Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.